With me today is Debbie Kizer, the founder and executive director of Imagine Art, and my former boss and a really good friend. You doing okay today, Debbie?
I'm doing pretty good.
I really appreciate you doing this with me. Debbie has been just an incredible inspiration, amazing person to a lot of people, including me. Actually, I feel like you're really like family at this point. I think we've
hmm
known each other for about 15 years or more, maybe. So I'm just gonna ask you some questions, and then we'll go from there. Basically, before we get to Imagine Art, specifically, I want to ask you about your background growing up and who were you in school? Like, which kid were you? And what was your family
Hmm.
life like?
Uh, I came from a divorced family, so prior to eight, it was a little bit rough. But after eight and beyond, it was a lot better. My stepdad's amazing, and we had a pretty incredible family. Kind of I went off road when I was about 15, so that made it challenging for my young adulthood. I was, for the most part, on my own for a bit there, struggling. But I don't know what kid I was. I think I was the compliant kid until I went off road, and then I was the trouble kid after that. And, I got into a lot of trouble from the 15 on. So, but prior to that, I was very compliant and eager to please.
If I remember correctly, did you say you had a job with lawyers at some point?
Yeah, when I was in high school, I worked for a law firm. I did a half day program at school, so I attended school half day, and I was a receptionist at a law firm. Yeah, my senior year.
I, I always feel like maybe you got some of your grit from that environment. Do you think that's possible or?
Maybe, maybe it was just a bunch of old fogies that smoked cigarettes. I mean, they had piles of
Okay.
ashtrays and cigarettes, and I was typing and ordering supplies. So I don't know. It wasn't.
Okay.
I think I got a lot of my grit from probably living independently. I lived on my
Okay.
own when I was 16
hmm
and was, finishing out high school and all of that. So I grew up pretty quick, I think,
And then at
based on
some
that.
point you were doing consulting
Yeah, so
for
after
disability.
graduating, so during college, I actually was in and around a lot of artists, and pretty much all my friends were artists getting art degrees at Sam Houston State
Okay.
University. I was the only one that really wasn't doing that for the most part and got a psychology degree. But when I got out of college, I was working in the industry of people with disabilities. I started in neuro rehab in the hospital setting for people with head injuries. And then during that time, I started dabbling in the arts. Like by the time my son was born, I was starting to play around with the arts just on a personal level, like as a place of healing. And I didn't actually step into the arts until 96. But prior to that, had started consulting in disability, specifically employment, supported employment, helping people carve positions that didn't exist. So there was a lot of creativity in what I did. I was typically working with people that had never been employed, hard to employ, underemployed, and I was doing a lot of job carving or creating jobs in areas, based on people's interests. And so Imagine Art kind of came out of that.
Okay.
1996, I basically did that for myself. I carved this job
hmm
for myself.
Okay. Yeah, that was gonna be what I was gonna ask you is how did that lead to starting Imagine Art? So you just got tired of working for a company and you wanted to do something in art and
Now, I pretty much just kind of fell flat on my face. I wouldn't say I got tired of working for a company. It was a lot of stress, the work that I was doing. There was a lot of quotas and just heavy production loads of expectation. And at that time, I was not thriving as a human. I was suffering under the relationships and had a child that was born with a disability. I started using drugs again. I had on and off been a drug user from the time I was 15 and didn't really fully get sober until I was 30 years old. And so in 1996, I was kind of right in the middle of that.
Mhm.
And I basically had a mental health breakdown and wasn't able to continue in the work in the way that I had been doing it. and I decided to exit it. I just walked into my boss's office and said, I'm quitting. I can't do this anymore. I'm a drug addict, and I can't do this. And I was pretty high functioning at that time. I remember him saying, well, you can come back. If you want to come back and do this later, just go take care of yourself. But I didn't come back. I really used that person-centered planning process that I had done with so many people. And I really took a long, hard look at what do I want to do and why was I made. And at that same exact time, there was this parallel thing happening where, one, I got sober and started my recovery process from mental health recovery, and I went into the church and became a believer. And so all of that was sort of happening at the same time. And it was really this very interesting process of, how did God make me? What am I interested in? What do I want to do? And so and I had been making projects and designing little mini programs or little projects for quite some time. And so it wasn't that difficult for me to design this perfect world for myself. And I was interested in going out into the arts, but I realized that there were no people with disabilities there in the arts. And my whole life was centered around disability. I was married to a person with a disability. My son was disabled. I was working for people with disabilities, for people with disabilities. And so my whole world was that. And I felt like I also didn't have a lot of self-assurance. I felt awkward around people that were not disabled. I felt judged. I just felt like I wasn't perfect. I felt pretty screwed up at that time in the 1996 when Imagine Art was formed. And when I wanted to go into the arts, I realized that when there was no people with disabilities in the arts, that I wanted to take them with me. And so it really started, if you think about how it started, it was kind of a selfish effort of like, I can't go alone. Will you go with me? And I found a group of 10 artists that were taking a class at the Mary Lee Foundation, and they were all learning to paint like Bob Ross, and they all had head injuries. And so I said, well, can I have 10 of these individuals and call them my artist people? And I just worked individually with each one of them and sat down with them and said, what do you really want to do? And, where have you ever taken an art class? And none of them had ever taken a class at Laguna Glory or Dougherty Arts or UT. And so each one of them, we picked a class in the community, and I got a grant from the city that paid for that class and paid for their art supplies. And then I got to go with them. And so that's really how I learned to make art myself. That's where I learned to paint.
One thing I know about you is you're a prolific grant writer. You don't think so?
Grants and contracts. I mean, most of Imagine Arts funding today is like government contracts. It's very interesting. We do get grants, and I do write grants. Most of our money comes from government contracts, which is, like a rinse and repeat often. It seems to be a good fit for us. And now looking back after 30 years, I realize that because our funding is government contracts, our model can be replicated by others, I think, a little bit more easily than had we gone the route of a lot of foundation grants and other things like that, or donor development.
Well, that's great. That's something I want to ask you later on, is about just advice for other people. I love hearing your story. I've heard you tell different parts of your life a few different times, and every time I learn something new, I think. That's a great story. Can you tell us about just those beginning years of Imagine Art, and then maybe kind of the history up to Tillery's time?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the beginning years were, completely different from my today. I mean, we had 10 artists that first year. I literally went to class with every single one of them, and I was like their job coach kind of thing. I stepped in and help them meet the teacher and eat a taco and go to the bathroom and set up their things and build friendships. So life was very chill for me at that time. And then that second year, more people wanted in, and I was like, well, I just can't, I can't keep replicating myself like this. I couldn't hire anybody. And so we basically decided to meet at the Mary Lee Foundation in their community room and bring all of our artists there and bring artists in. So we had artists that would come in and do a special workshop. But as soon as we brought all the artists together, And we opened it up more to the public. I mean, we went from 10 artists to, I think, 16, 35, 45, 65. Like, it grew really quickly. And as soon as we brought them together in a community setting, I just kind of lost control out of like where this thing was growing, because they had a mind of their own and they knew what they wanted. They wanted to exhibit, so that second year,
Hmm.
I think we had 16 different exhibits, and they pitched in and really helped it. I mean, I provided the money that was needed to buy frames, and I'd buy the cookies and stuff like that and get everybody there and cart a lot of art around. But it was really very communal, grassroots, and I was a part of it. I was painting, I was showing, I was, hanging out. And then when we moved into the shack, the self help advocacy center, we just kept getting these free spaces. So we kept bartering for free space. And we had some pretty incredible runs in various spaces. We were on Fifth Street one time downtown, Congress and Fifth. We were there for a year. So we had a building in East Austin. And so we moved around a lot and were just like bartering, and then as cheap a rent as we could get it. But all the while, we're trying to discern who we are and what it is that we're doing. And our population kind of kept shifting as well. When we were in the Self Help Advocacy Center, our numbers went from like 65 to 195,
Oh,
and
wow.
all these individuals with mental health conditions became registered to become a part of our organization, and we started having more professional shows. We opened our first gallery. We started doing things like campouts, and just kind of expanding our services, even to be more not counseling professionally, but just a lot of peer support. And that was when we established ourselves as a ministry, because at that time I had been a believer for a little while, but it took me a while to kind of sink my roots into what that meant and God's call over my life. And then when we were in that season of serving people with mental health conditions, it really became apparent that God was doing something here. Like, this was not by an accident, and that He had taken so many different things from my life and woven them into this thing called Imagine Art. And I really, agreed with that and basically established a statement of faith in our bylaws. But, that whole probably first 8 or 10 or 12 years was kind of tumultuous. It depended on my own health, my own
Hmm.
well-being, and my own mental state and of recovery. And then also our funding. It wasn't really until we moved into the building on Alexander that things began to stabilize. And I think that really speaks to what place does for community, what having your own building and that stability of place and the sense of belonging that people have when they have a place, and the fact that people can come and gather and commune with one another and share resources. Like, it really just took the roof off of our what we were capable of at that point when we had a building like that. And you were there at that time, and you saw our organization go from renting one single room to controlling a 10,000 square foot warehouse. And it really just spoke to the power of the arts to not only transform people that we were serving, but transform that building and that corner where we were planted. So anyway, we over time, our we've always been this grassroots. We've always been driven by the needs of the artist. I mean, as the founder and CEO, I have certainly positioned myself to make decisions and kind of, it's like a DJ or something, where I'm just like, what is it, managing the music, the sound of what is happening there. And I have this long range trajectory, a vision where we're going. But our community, like, I'm tapped into the vibe of what people need and and that's what we are making our decisions based on in terms of how we're growing. And so we saw, food security was a big issue, and we started growing food and cooking food and serving food. And that became a really big thing at the Real Street location. And then we saw that people needed attendant care in order to come to the facility. And so we started providing attendant care, helping people go to the bathroom, and you were instrumental in helping people do that. And everybody just chipped in to make it possible for everybody to come to be able. And then we started attracting, of course, with that, a lot of artists that had other kinds of needs, artists that had intellectual developmental disabilities and autism, or they were blind, or they had cerebral palsy. Those artists started coming out of the woodwork and joining our community, because we were a place that was supportive. And with that, we were able to look around and leverage, I was able to lean back into that old disability background that I had, and I knew about funding sources like day programs and vocational dollars and things like that. And so we were able to leverage some of that and become licensed to provide day programming for people with disabilities. And then in that building, as you witnessed, when we took over the whole 10,000 square foot, we made a choice at that time to open our doors to non-disabled artists, because we did not want 80 people in that building with autism. We felt like we wanted to create an opportunity to serve the larger need of artists in the city. So we opened our doors, and we inadvertently created the only integrated day program in the nation. Day programs for people with intellectual developmental disabilities are typically segregated, and we ended up integrating this. And the way we did that was by offering high caliber art services and materials and opportunities like exhibitions that were professional.
Which is really great. I feel like probably Imagine Art was one of the few places that not only mixed communities of different kinds of disabilities. I don't feel like a lot of services have people with mental disabilities mixed with IDD, but then take it to the next step and just bring in non-disabled artists, which I just saw as a really beautiful thing, a wonderful balance. Even just within the disabled community, one person that's, having like chronic depression or something needs to help this person who can't see or hear, and they sort of help each other in that way. And then just having disabled people not be isolated and be known with non-disabled artists was just revolutionary to me. I don't know. What do you think? Do you see
Oh,
that
it was
happening anywhere else?
absolutely. Yeah, I don't actually. I think people with IDD are protected from the world, and people with mental health are typically looked at as, a population that needs to be kept separately, especially homeless people with mental health. And the fact that we created a space that welcomed all of those populations, I'm sure it was scary for some people watching us do that. But what we saw was something incredibly beautiful. And I just, homeless people are usually rejected when they walk in the door. People think, oh my God, they're here, and look, they brought all their crap with them, or they stink or whatever. They need a bath, or they're going to want something from me, a ride or some food. A lot of times when homeless people will enter into spaces, they're not welcome in the way that other people are welcomed. And yet our population of people with intellectual disabilities didn't have that filter. They didn't have that judgment and story in their head about this. And so they would just, come up and welcome and hug and drag people over and help me do this. And it was just very interesting to watch that, and then see the impact that it had on the individual with a mental health condition, or the individual that was homeless, because it was unexpected. And I feel like it caused those individuals to really let their guard down a lot and receive that
Yeah.
unconditional love that
Hmm.
many of our artists were just so ready to give. And then those people, they had a lot of skills. They had a lot of skills,
Right.
and they were teaching people how to make ceramics and to paint, and they were serving as art directors And I think that was really beautiful for them because I think people with mental illness and people that are homeless with mental illness, particularly, they do not get the opportunity to serve very often. And
Yep.
I think often, for them to have a role that's contributing and needed, they're needed by somebody else. It was
Yes.
pretty powerful to watch that.
I've seen you do a handful of scary things and just kind of
Yeah.
wait and see how it's going to turn out. There used to be this swing set in the building on Alexander or Real Street, this which had it was a warehouse, had concrete floors, and there was a swing set hanging from the rafters. And one of our artists, Richmond, probably weighs 200 pounds, right? Richmond, he would swing and his feet would almost touch the ceiling, and I could see the rafter like bending, finally I didn't ask anybody, I just took the swing set down.
Good, yeah, it was good thinking, Tony. I had a swing set like that in my living room. I have kind of a shotgun house, and when my daughter's friends would come over, I have feet prints on my ceiling from
Oh.
the girls. So yeah.
So, okay, so I just have to say that was in my world, that was such a golden time,
It was.
that old warehouse and just all the people and
Yeah.
people would just suddenly appear that you hadn't seen in a year or two,
Yeah.
and just all the nooks and crannies of that building. I hear that from a lot of people that they
Yeah.
that they
Yeah,
miss the
it
old
was a
building, but
beautiful, beautiful season of our life. And it
it
was
was
grievous.
it
We
was
closed in 2020 with COVID, and that was,
yeah. Which was
yeah.
probably good. I think it was good. A good transition. Zoom was kind of amazing to see everybody transition over to classes
Yeah.
over Zoom and how quickly everybody adapted. But
Mm.
I think we still have some casualties, some people
Oh,
missing from
yeah.
that time.
Yeah, we still have community members that never returned to our community from that. And then a lot of our artists without disabilities didn't come on board with that. I mean, they didn't need Zoom classes for art making, they didn't need that social connection in the same way that
Right.
artists with intellectual or other developmental or types of disabilities needed. So our community shifted during that 5 years that we were displaced. And I just, I can't, I don't even know how many times you helped us move. I'm sure I just owe you a lifetime of something, dessert or dinner out or something for helping us move. We moved from that 10,000 square foot to 900 square foot, and just the loss that was associated with that. It took me quite a while to kind of, not or I realized that our artists didn't experience the loss probably in the same way that I did. I think much of what we had gained in that 10 years in that building, people took on the inside of them. They took it, they took it inside their heart. It's like the temple going out, They took it, the presence of God and whatever we had experienced in that place, they took it out with them. So it's beautiful to realize that later.
Before we move to the Tillery topic, what do you think it is about the fine art studio setting that benefits the artist that other support or care systems miss?
Well, I learned probably 30 years ago that basically you can integrate people with disabilities in community quickly and effectively if you focus on a common passion. That passion could be football. It could
Hmm.
be boating or fishing. It doesn't have to be the arts. So that really was the kind of the fire starter for me. It just happened to be that I loved the arts and I wanted that art. But I mean, it could have been sports or rock climbing or something like that.
Turns out art is a very inclusive. It includes a lot of different people,
Yeah, it
and
does.
it's vague enough that lots of people can engage.
Yeah, and then I mean, then what sports doesn't have. I mean, any kind of common passion like that unites people. And just a quick example, like you could have an individual with a significant disability that will have a common bond with a non-disabled person because they're both, UT fans or something like that. So that's just
Hmm.
like a simple example. But the arts itself is really powerful in the sense that it acts like a catalyst beyond just the shared passion that can create a new bond, but it acts like a catalyst that can actually change something. It was this way and now it's something completely different, like a caterpillar to a butterfly is what the arts does. And we have seen that in research historically. I mean, it can happen in underperforming school or nursing homes where there's abuse or neighborhoods that have high crime. Put the arts and you plant it there and you bring in a bunch of artists and a bunch of arts resources and you start making things beautiful. And suddenly there's a change of mind. There's a change of investment, changing a sense of belonging. People start caring and serving, and, it just awakens something in people that I think beauty does that. It awakens. So music and theater and all of those arts have the power to change. It's like all of a sudden a garden that you just start watering and everything starts popping up and blooming in that. And so that's what we realized the arts was doing. So within that, we thought, well, we have obviously taken this art model and made the significant impact on a segregated system called dehabilitation. Dayhab program, day programming, and what else is possible? Would it be possible for us to take that same creative placemaking strategy and apply it to something else? So we applied it to long-term care, and we've been experiencing what would it look like if, our artists and the arts were impacting long-term care in the way that people with disabilities get their attendant care services through Medicaid. So we've been doing that for the last 9 years. And then we decided to plant this whole demonstration, kind of what this creative placemaking demonstration on this campus at the single address. And so that's what we did in 2025. We had been building for 5 years this project, and we now moved our entire operation over to the single address. And we're positioning ourselves to demonstrate the power of the arts to change systems, basically. So we're changing systems of dayhab, of peer support, food security, long-term care, affordable housing.
Well, on that note, can we go ahead and switch to Tillery? Can you just talk about what Tillery is, maybe just kind of the way back 6 or 7 years ago, planning on it, and then what it is now, and then the outcomes?
Sure. So Tillery is a street name, and that's where we planted ourselves at 1127 Tillery. We were displaced for 5 years, so we lost our amazing building, the warehouse we talked about. We lost that in September 2020. And that same exact month, the city awarded us this Pecan Grove property at 1127 Tillery Street. We had been working on that property probably 3 years before that. And, it was a grassroots effort. It was just a sort of happenstance, stumble into situation. Our passion for wanting to live together and work together in a shared address came out of our retreats. We got funding from the Millers and their foundation, and we started going on camping retreats that you were a part of, and we did that annually for, 5 years maybe. And, being around a campfire late at night, waking up and shuffling around in our pajamas, we had horses and we were eating together and making art and learning together and swimming. And I think our community just decided this is what we want. We want to be together, live together, work together. And so that kind of planted the seed in me to start talking about that and dreaming about that. But it wasn't until probably 2017 when the NEA gave us a small grant to really try to make that happen. And we used that grant as a pre-development, to create the kind of schematic drawings and all of that. And one of our artists at that time, Steve, he wanted to buy a house. And I was like, I have no idea, Steve, how to help you buy a house. And he's like, oh, no, sure, I'm sure you can help me go to the right place to buy a house. And I was like, I don't know, just call the city or whatever. Well, he did, and then he turns around and he says, hey, I need you to come to this meeting with me. And I was like, what meeting? And he really didn't even know where the meeting was, who he was meeting with. And I was like, okay, Steve, I'm going to go with you just to support you in this meeting so that you can buy a house. And I walk in, and the meeting's at neighborhood housing. And I'm looking around at the posters, and I'm like, where are we? What do these people do? And he didn't know. He didn't have a clue. And so then we get ushered into this room, and I was like, what do y'all do? And they were like, we fund affordable housing, community development. I was like, you're kidding, really? And I told them what we wanted, and they were just floored. And that began our process. And poor Steve didn't get his house. But they told me we want small boutique programs like yours serving this niche community that nobody wants to serve, and it's important work. And so they were vested in us, and they connected us with Mark Rogers of Guadalupe Neighborhood Development Corp, who introduced us to the Pecan Grove, and that's where we began our process. So we used our NEA grant to apply for that property, which the city initially didn't. They had it in their portfolio. It was their property, but they weren't letting go of it. And when I first asked about it, they were like, no, we're not letting go of that property. And I remember just saying, well, when you do, or if you do, let me know. And then sure enough, a year later, they did. So we worked with neighborhood housing and Texas Department Housing Community Development. So we didn't raise any money for this project. It was an $18 million project that was funded by these two entities, basically. And we have a development team, Emory Capital and Citrine Development, that they were the experts that knew how to do this. And really, Imagine Art just came along for the ride. I mean, we were the visionary, we were the catalyst, the fire starter, but then they did everything. And I showed up at a Zoom meeting basically once a week for a couple of years, and just watched them do everything. And that, people do affordable housing all day long. And it's just, this is what they do for a living. And so we were able to envision the program and build our community of people that was going to have the first dibs at kind of getting in the door. And so we had 66 units, 88 total beds, and I think that the Imagine Art community positioned itself to fill, I think we have 63 people living there that are from the Imagine Art community. So it's been, an extremely powerful experience, a lot of hard work, but it's been extremely rewarding.
How does the term creative placemaking fit into this? And could you define it and then tell me how that fits into
Yeah, I
what
mean,
we're
I
doing
wish I
now?
would have pulled that up, the definition of it, but basically, it's worth looking it up. Creative placemaking, essentially, you're leveraging the power of art and place to bring a transformational change to something else. And so you can apply creative placemaking to literacy, to crime, to abuse, neglect. You can apply creative placemaking to things that you want to see transformed. And it's like watering a garden, basically. It's a strategy. It's a
Okay.
strategy of approaching a problem using the arts.
So, what good things do you see coming out of Tillery? What do we call it? Live Make. What good
Yeah,
things?
so the
I
name
was
of the
calling it Tillery,
apartment.
but it's
Yeah, people call it Tillery and people call it Live Make. I think it's a lot easier to say Tillery for most, but Tillery's the street, and then the apartment complex is called Live Plus Make, with a plus sign, and so people call it Live Make. Um, I'm glad we talked about the Real Street and that diversity of all those people, because what I see that we just opened 6 months ago, and we have an extremely diverse population living there. So we have people with disabilities, we have people with intellectual, developmental, cerebral palsy, blind. I mean, just really autism. We have 13 people that have never lived independently before in their lifetime. We have people that left group homes because they heard we were doing this, and they just did an exodus of their government funding and walked away from it. People that have been living with their mother for 20 years. And then we also have non-disabled people. 3 of our staff moved in. We have people coming from the community that didn't know anything about us that moved in, and then we had negotiated 15 units in partnership with the city to house the homeless. So we've got these like huge diverse groups coming attracted to this setting, and I'm glad we talked about the beauty of what we've experienced before, because it
Mm-hmm.
reminds me that it's going to be okay. Right
Yeah.
now it feels very unstable. I just remember when we first opened, walking through the halls and looking at and realizing, oh my God, there's all these doors and I have no idea what's going on behind those doors. And it's just like Tillery after midnight. And I mean, it's, in some ways it felt like camp that never ends without any staff because we're not providing, this is not supported living. And yet we're providing a lot of support, but it really is independent living. And so it's been, a very unique experience. And it's a good reminder that God's doing something. And, we can take risks. We've always taken risks, and we have their best interests in mind. People with disabilities, they, should be allowed to have the same risk that you and I have for broken hearts and all of those things. I think people often, especially with developmental disabilities, have been overprotected, and rightfully so. I mean, abuse and all of that is like super excessive. And we've seen some of that. We've seen people, since we've lived there, people have had squatters that are inch their way into their apartment and bring 3 dogs with them. And, they've been there for 10 days. We've had situations like that where we've had to bring the police in and get this person out of their apartment because they're obviously exploiting that individual, taking advantage of them. So there is a lot of high risk in what we're doing. But, so many people, I think, didn't have people that were already living independently were not doing so in rich, abundant environments with support. They were living in high crime, impoverished, pretty risky settings of other affordable housing. And then there was a lot of people who basically would have never lived independently had it not been for this project, because they or their family member or somebody had determined that they needed a lot more support. And without the type of setting that we have, it could have never been possible for them. So, I don't know what the final outcome is. I mean, I pray that it's transformation. I pray that we'll be like a light on a hill, and that our entire community, through the power of the arts, will be transformed for the glory of God. And then I pray that our community will leverage that moment for something powerfully good that impacts the systems of disability forever forward. That's really what I pray for. And that's what I believe that God has shown me of why he did all of this, why he has this favor for us, because he wants to take this glory place that he made, and he wants to, it's like a fireball, throw it at the disability systems, and just show the community what's possible with Medicaid money, what's possible with these government resources, because government funded programs don't have to be ugly. They don't have to be places where people get abused. They don't have to be poverty. Since we moved in, we had 3 people of our staff that moved in themselves. And then we've hired 7 people, 7 of the residents we've hired as caretakers or kitchen workers or whatnot. So and this is just the beginning. So I don't really know where it's going to go. I wasn't planning on hiring 7 people to be caretakers. We've hired people with intellectual developmental disabilities to be attendants for other people with intellectual disabilities. And all of these things always just happen because it just sort of happens in front of you. It's like watching something sprout up out of the ground and you're like, what's that? You're like, well, here, let's water it. And it's like, oh, I think that's something we can eat or do something with, And most of I think what we experience, most of our outcomes are kind of like that, where we're just nurturing and we're facilitating and we're loving on something. And then these things happen that we could have never planned for that.
From what you said earlier, decisions are made based on the desires of the population, of the people you're serving, and that's how
Yeah,
you
and
make
I am still
decisions.
driving. I mean, I'm driving the bus for sure. So I'm deciding, we're having this programming or whatever, or we're going to go after this funding, we're going to build this campus, but all of that is, being informed by our community, and we are still extremely grassroots.
So I just want to describe the property for anybody who doesn't know about it or hasn't seen it. It's East Central Austin. How many acres is it?
I think it's only about 3 acres.
About 3 acres, which is huge in
Yeah,
Central
the whole thing
Austin.
is 5 acres if you include the pecan grove, because we're nestled next
Okay.
to a pecan grove that has, I don't even know, maybe 80 trees.
So a huge pecan grove. It's beautiful with an apartment complex next to it. In the front of the complex, there oftentimes you'll see complexes that'll have a coffee shop or whatever underneath. This has an art studio, gallery, some offices, and a clay studio, and a kitchen, and a full
Mhm.
industrial kitchen, commercial kitchen. Super nice. I got to hang a show here in nice lighting, and they've got a nice hanging system. They've got kilns operating in the clay studio, and so a very nice space and a lot of neat stuff, nearby in the neighborhood too, and close to public transportation.
The neighborhood recently was designated as an arts district. I don't know if you knew that.
I
Very
didn't know that.
visible.
I
Hmm.
know that a couple of we're close to Balm Studios. We're close to Canopy.
Hmm.
Um, I can't think of what else, but we're close to a couple of communal art places.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it's only been established. It's not even a year yet. Has there been anything unexpected positives that you've seen come out of this at this point? Or has it just all been work and hope?
I don't know. I mean, it is still very, very young project. I think that if you look at the individual, you will see, sprouts of change, and the needle is moving on the individual lives. You can also look at pockets of people and see things that were unexpected, deep relationships between 3 or 4 people, and I think that you're within some of those groups where you've got 3 or 4 people that are living there. My son moved there, and that was unexpected. I wasn't planning. I have a son with a developmental disability, and he married 2 years ago and had a baby a year ago. She has a developmental disability. The baby has a developmental disability, and I moved them all there. They're in a 3 bedroom, and it's tough. Without community supporting them, I don't even know what it would be like. I can't
Hmm.
imagine them being isolated without the support. And we have so much support for them. I mean, people that are, the kitchen is, I saw on the refrigerator today, there's little baby jars with the chicken noodle soup in it that was made at lunch that's being saved for June. I can call a neighbor at 2 in the morning if I need to and have them go over there. I don't have to rush over and help. There's so many people that are supporting them. So there's a lot of little pockets like that where I can see the needle moving, and I tend to think about things that way now, where it's like I just realize that there's transformation that's necessary on every level. And you're just looking for that little bit of movement, because it really is going to be years before we fully stand back and
Hmm.
see like the difference, and we have to remind ourselves what it was like, years ago. So, and I'm very interested in beautifying the complex, and so we're doing random acts of beauty, which is very slow to get going. And it's just it never it's just always amazes me how just projects and community settings, just how they can really, it takes a while. It's like giving birth, to get these things up and going. But over time, I think that that is going to just take off and be a natural part of who we are as an artist community, where it's like that gutter shouldn't be brown. Like we need to just like paint a mural on that gutter. And I think that eventually that's going to just take off in our community, and we will kind of become ourselves and become and have the freedom of creative expression on that campus. And we have kind of carte blanche permission to art up everything. And so that's exciting for me. But everything is just in such a beginning stages. I mean, 6 months is how long we've been there. It's
Well,
hard to say.
it's so this has been a huge endeavor, quite a huge accomplishment. But I think that it's possible because your goals and your ideas are even bigger than this.
Right.
Is that
So this is
correct?
a
So,
stepping stone.
one thing I know, one time you and I were in a kitchen after I think I've told you this story, but we were in a cleaning up, doing dishes after a show and cleaning up the building and getting ready to shut down for the night, probably like 11, o'clock at night or something. And you were like, I'm so tired. And I was like, stop planning stuff, you know? So one thing I know about you is you're definitely a visionary and always have new things you're thinking about. Are any of those ideals about the what is the property over by Mopac, the state,
Yeah. State supported living
that,
center. Yeah.
yeah, state supported living, that, or what are your plans for the future? What are your ideas that you're got
Well,
just
this
waiting to put time to?
yeah. I mean, the Tillery project, it really is a stepping stone for us, which is, I think, just shocking when other people realize that. I've known it all this time that this is not our end thing. This is just the beginning of something else, that we built this giant campus and we got 88 people living there. And so basically this whole creative thing we've been doing, and why I feel like we're now doing it on this address, is because we are called to demonstrate this model. And the reason that we're called to demonstrate the model is so that we can replicate it. And we can either offer it up for replication, we can replicate it. And where our sights are set is on the long-term care system throughout Texas. So we do still have 13 institutions in Texas. And we have one in Austin, the Austin State Supported Living Center. These institutions are large legacy assets to the state of Texas. They're 100-acre campuses that are just incredible. Live oaks and old brick buildings that are just begging to be repurposed. So there's a lot of opportunity there. There's only 3,000 or so people with disabilities living in these institutions. And there's a lot of resources that are going, a lot of financial resources that are going to these institutions. The entire system is actually up for sunset review at the next legislative session, which means that the government will take a hard look at their effectiveness of this agency and consider closing, consolidating, reducing the agency. And so we are trying to position ourselves to demonstrate our model and get ourselves in front of legislators and key officials at Health and Human Services, local government, and start those conversations. Like, what would it look like if we replicated what we've done at Live Make on the state supported living campus? I think when I think about the vision forward, the way that I kind of think about it is that Imagine Art facilitates a partnership between the state and the city government to step into the State Supported Living Center in Austin, to repurpose that campus in such a way that the footprint of the institution reduces to a building that then partners with a local university for super high caliber services that move the needle on people in an institution. Like, they're really targeting support services. And sadly, most of the people that are in the State Supported Living Center right this moment are older individuals, especially at the Austin. I mean, I'd probably say 80 or 90% of the population is elderly. So they're not going to probably be there in 20 years, in the next 15 years. And so being able to transition the campus in a way that it becomes different, in the sense of when individuals come in, that it's a crisis transition services rather than a long-term placement for somebody's next 60 years. Children are no longer being put in the institution at kindergarten like they were 60 years ago. And so leveraging that opportunity of changing times and seizing and repurposing the 100-acre campus to where it's being opened up for creative placemaking, for arts and organizations like HCS, Medicaid waiver services to come in and establish various models of transition housing and supported housing. I kind of picture like the Mueller development, is it's a very walkability and
Hmm.
parks and haircut and coffee shop and a movie theater and all of that stuff. And if you can create something similar that is a community thriving place that is also supportive, that would have increased supports for persons with disabilities intentionally. I feel like what we've been doing, that God really just wants to leverage that for a greater good to move the needle on disability systems. Because disability systems have been sort of stuck in the same pattern that they were 45 years ago. There's not
Hmm.
a lot that's changed. And providers tend to kind of create the cookie cutter and just keep repeating it, but the fact is it's not. And there's a lot of abuse and neglect and exploitation that's happening within the systems.
It's all wonderful, Debbie. I I've been thinking about this a lot, just about changing culture in general, and
Mm.
on all different demographics. And you're just doing. It's just been an amazing ride, getting to see what you're doing, and I hope that it does replicate. What advice would you have to someone who wanted to use this model? Do you have any tips or ideas, or just ways to start, or think the most important things they need to know?
Well, I mean, I think the grassroots component of what we did is pretty important. I think that's hard for people. Most people probably just want to grab something and set it up. But I
Hmm.
think the grassroots bit is pretty important because we really are a community
It's very
of people.
relational.
Yeah, and really, there's like an equal playing field, whether you're the CEO or the artist that came in last week. It feels like there's an equal level of voice. You have a voice,
Imagine art has never felt like I'm the professional and you're the client to me.
right?
It's always felt like we're peers.
Yeah. So if there's any one thing, I think that would be part. The other thing is, I feel like God's presence and hand on it is pretty important. I mean, you could obviously create this model without that, but I
Hmm.
feel like God has definitely done something on purpose here. And if other ministries wanted to take this model and carry it forward, I think that's the most powerful form of the model, because I think that transformation and, so much of what happens inside of our four walls or whatever, um, is just kind of this upside down kingdom stuff, that we could not have planned for that. And I feel like a lot of that is just that ministry focus of us leaning into the presence of God covering
Hmm.
us as a community. And we're extremely diverse too. We accept anybody that wants to come into that community, whether you're Christian or not Christian, just all kind, we don't have a lot of ministries, I feel like, have a lot of rules, and it's like, well, you got to fit within the this in terms of like your beliefs or whatever, but we don't really align ourselves with anything but God. And within that, we're like, God can help you decide that. Like, we're not even gonna help you decide about all these doctrines or theology. We don't take a bunch of camps on political roads or anything. And I think that that's also really helped us, because as a creative community, we don't want people to feel like they have to go away because they don't believe what we believe, or
Hmm.
they're not voting the way we're voting. And so I think those are some important cultural things that we have embedded into who we are. And then just establishing really strong values also of care for one another, being a safe place. We've exited people over the years. If they demonstrate over and over again that they're don't want what we have in terms of transformation, and they're hurting people, like, we have to exit people. And it can be sad to lose an individual, but just for, it's important for the whole. And the rest of it, the funding model, the compliance and the DAHAB and the AmeriCorps, we leverage AmeriCorps members as a resource, Health and Human Services and all that license, all of that, that can just be, it's like a recipe, here's a recipe, now all of that requires administrative capacity and everything. You've got to have an administrative head about you to be able to do some of those things. So you need the right people at the helm, I think, that are going to be able to cross T's and dot I's. But the model, I think, once we get it on paper, it's not rocket science by any means. It's pretty straightforward.
So Imagine Art's website is imagineart.net, imagineart.net. And are there any resources just to learn more about the things we've been talking about? I guess about Tillery a little bit and the studio a little.
If you're interested in creative placemaking, the NEA's website has a ton of information around creative placemaking. Like, everything is being driven by creative placemaking through the NEA right now. I mean, there's great information on our website. Everything about our programs is on there. We have 4 programs: the Fine Arts Studio, long-term care program, the peer support program, and then the kitchen. And then all 4 of those programs are at the campus. We don't have any current openings in housing, and I think we have an interest list. But yeah, everything should be on our website, our events page.
Okay. I really appreciate Debbie.
Yeah.
It was pretty cool.
Yay! Well, it's been amazing
It was a lot of fun.
to know you, Tony. I mean, you came on board as a volunteer. I think you were in between jobs. And you came into our studio services through the Austin House of Prayer because you were hanging out there with them, I guess. And you just kept coming back. And you stopped, and then we hired you. You started as a volunteer, and then we hired you. And I mean, I appreciate you. I feel like you have served me over the last 10 years in ways. I remember when I was sick in 2021, and I had to step back from work for a while. I had 5 different surgeries that year, and I remember asking you, if you could help me. And you moved in and helped us open our first residential home, and you lived with people for 5 years. So it's like you've given a lot to the community, and you really are an exemplary member of the community.
Thanks.
You're a story of transformation in and of yourself, and what you have contributed back has just been amazing. So
it's true.
Thank you.
Your story. Thank you, Debbie. Your stories of being in the chill environment back in the early days. That was my experience when I first came to the big building on Tiller on Real Street. Just having a cup of coffee and chit chatting with people and working on a little watercolor. It was just such a nice season. So yeah, definitely I've seen myself transform through this experience. So and grow and mature in a lot of ways. So I really appreciate it.
I'm an artist too. I'm a painter, and I don't focus on selling my work or marketing my work.
I forgot to mention that you're a painter. I meant to.
I'm a painter and a writer, and I'm just not getting back into it. I feel like those years of being displaced, and I was just kind of fell in a hole. That happens to us in seasons where it's been really tough and hard work. But I'm coming out of it, and I'm painting, and so I've got a bunch of different painting projects and a writing project, and so anyway, and my granddaughter, she's going to be 11 months old, and I realize that children inspire me to make art. And so, I've got tons of little projects that I want to do for her, and paintings and books and things like that. So anyway, always an artist, and just to be around this artistic creative community is just pure blessing.
Very much so. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tony.